Hey everyone, Raelan here. I am so excited, as always, as I am when I have stories like this to share with you. I have Rebecca Tolin with me. She's in San Diego, so we're both in California, which made scheduling this incredibly easy. I'm so grateful that she's joining me here today to talk to all of you here on my channel about her journey with ME/CFS. She was unwell with ME/CFS for 13 years before finally fully recovering. So she's got a lot of really great stuff to share. So I'm really excited about this. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for taking the time to do this
Oh,
today.
it's such a pleasure, Raelan. I've watched your channel recently and I'm just so touched by the heart you put into it. It's really clear that you're just here to support people and just offer all the different ways that helped you and helped others recover. So I'm happy to share my story.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, it's all the people like yourself who put in the time and the effort and the courage to talk about their story publicly like this that makes it all possible. So yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, I mean we're here to talk about your health journey. So let's get into it. Can you take us back a bit? How did this all begin for you?
Yeah. Well, before the symptoms started, I was in my early 30s. I was a TV news reporter, so I had like a very busy, high-powered, stressful job, but one I really enjoyed. I did a lot of international travel. I socialized a lot, so I was busy. I exercised. I kind of did all the things that you think of doing in your early 30s. And I actually went on a trip to Asia just for leisure, but I ended up having a really traumatic experience when I was over there. I was sexually assaulted, and that led to a really grueling urinary tract infection that I got on a 17-hour plane trip back. And my whole system just kind of blacked out. I actually sort of lost consciousness on the plane. It was really an awful experience. And when I got back to the States, I was just really exhausted, but I was still able to work and I still kind of pushed through things and I went to a few doctors. I really sort of blocked out the trauma and I wasn't able to process that on a conscious emotional level. And then strangely, the next year, around the same time of year, it was like late fall, I went back to Asia and I was questioning the trip because I wasn't feeling that well. That time I got these three colds, kind of like back to back. One was when I was there in China, one was on the plane trip back, and then one was once I returned back to San Diego. And then my system completely crashed after that. I just went totally kaput. I felt like I had the flu 24/7. I had a lot of the quintessential ME/CFS symptoms. I couldn't sleep at all overnight, which was really, the insomnia was a grueling one for me. I was so exhausted for a number of weeks and even months, I would say, that I could hardly just walk around the house. The brain fog was really bad. I felt like I couldn't remember the name of, a good friend or a colleague. Digestive issues. I also started getting hot flashes and kind of like premenopausal symptoms, even though I was so young. So that's kind of how all it began in a nutshell.
So what did you think when all this started happening?
I was so scared, Raylin. I was just really, I'm sure like you and so many people can relate, I was just terrified because although I had had some fatigue, it started really coming on very suddenly after those viruses. And I didn't in any way think about the trauma that had happened to me or actually a previous similar assault that happened when I was 19. None of that was in my awareness. I really was just wanting to get well. So I did use whatever strength I have to start researching and going to doctors. And basically my mom was driving me around because I couldn't really drive or do anything. I was really lucky that I lived in the same town as my parents. And I sort of just started urgently going to doctors, everything from allopathic medicine to naturopathic medicine to integrative medicine at that point to some specialists. And they did diagnose me with ME/CFS, which at that time was largely called chronic fatigue syndrome more than the ME. Post-viral syndrome, some of them would say. There was some fibromyalgia in there because of all the body pain, although that also can be very typical with CFS. And I remember thinking, on the one hand, I was relieved to have a diagnosis because I suddenly couldn't go to work. I had to just tell my boss, well, I used to be someone who would work like 60 hours a week, and I can't go to work anymore. So it sort of helped me in that way. But on the other hand, it was really devastating because I remember particularly a naturopathic doctor who I had so much faith in. And I thought, well, he's natural. He's going to help me recover in a really gentle way. And he specialized in this diagnosis. And he actually said, like, we don't know what the cause is, and there is no cure. And really, you're going to have to live with this. I mean, that's all I can tell you. And I just remember bawling, being so devastated and really feeling like this was just this death sentence, but in a way, a life sentence that I was given that I would have to live with for years.
Had you heard of CFS when you got this diagnosis?
I don't think so. I mean, it wasn't something that I didn't know anyone that had CFS. Maybe distantly I had heard of it, but I really didn't know much about it. And of course, the diagnosis, chronic fatigue syndrome, sounds like you just need a nap. But my life was like feeling like I had the flu 24/7 and I couldn't even sleep. That was really hard because I never got any relief from the symptoms. I would usually sleep like a couple hours a night. But no, it was really new to me. And I had been a reporter, so I started researching as much as I could and seeing as many doctors as I could over really what became the next 13 years.
And in those initial times, did any of these doctors or practitioners that you were seeing recommend any sort of treatment plan?
Yeah, there were all kinds of things. I mean, like you, I think I was on tons of supplements. I was on probably 40 or 50 different supplements at one time. And I had all my little baggies and my little pill boxes lined up. I didn't really ever see a change with that. I went to a DO, a doctor of osteopathy, who also practiced homeopathy, and she put me on the anti-candida diet. So actually for years, I wasn't even eating, carrots or any grains or anything like that, which really wasn't a diet that I liked. I had been mainly plant-based before, but I was willing to do whatever. And those things weren't making a difference. So then I started really going to more specialists, neurologists, endocrinologists, rheumatologists. The rheumatologists actually suggested antiviral intravenous drugs. And I had been a bit more natural, but of course I was willing to try anything. So I really thought this was going to work, and my entire system crashed. I ended up back in bed for months after those medications. I had done a lot of IV vitamins. I got really into Ayurveda, and I do think that kind of helped me live a little more healthy, balanced life and start moving back into more plant foods. But it didn't shift the symptoms. I went to all kinds of energy healers. And I actually did see a little relief with some of the energy healers, but it would just be very short-lived, and I would kind of go back to my baseline. Oh gosh, I went to even there's sleep psychologists, there's sleep doctors, by the way. There's every kind of sleep expert. And that was still a really vexing symptom. When I wouldn't sleep, the symptoms would be a lot worse the next day. And eventually I started going to see some psychologists because I was starting to connect. There was a lot of psychological, trauma and grief that happened before the onset of these symptoms. And in these years, I should say, not to sound like this is such a sob story, but I know you really place a value on just being honest with our stories. There was a lot of personal griefs. My father was very ill and eventually passed away about 5 years into my illness. My mother almost died, and they were like my rocks. I was single. An engagement had broken up because it was just so hard to sustain. He couldn't really understand why I couldn't do anything anymore. I was about to lose my house. I had lost a career I really loved. So it was just, there was a lot going on. And now what I know, in how I healed, I see how all those emotional stressors were really activating my brain and nervous system and making the symptoms worse. I didn't really make those connections at the time, but I do think some psychotherapy was helpful just to kind of talk through some of these griefs that were going on.
That is a lot. That is a lot of heavy, hard things that you were hit with. I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of that. How did this impact you, emotionally, psychologically? A lot of us understandably start feeling severe depression, during this journey. What was that like for you?
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. I think those of us who go through this need to be acknowledged. And a lot of times we're really not in the healthcare system. We're just sort of this body that is trying to get better. But at times I fell into some depression. I'm lucky in that I never sank deep into a depression. And I never really actively thought about taking my life. But I remember just years where I felt like, what's the point of living at all? I mean, all I'm doing is taking these supplements, like eating foods I don't even like. For what? Like I have no purpose anymore. It was really hard to socialize too, because when I would, it would activate symptoms. So I wasn't doing a whole lot of that other than a couple close friends and family that would come visit. So it did take its toll. I think though, for the most part, I was able to kind of keep some hope and some optimism. Although doctors were saying we don't have a cure, there was something in me that was like, but this isn't me. Like, this isn't my life. This is not how it's going to go. I know that there's something that can get well. And there's something in me even that is well and that can heal on this physical level. And I was always a somewhat spiritual person, but I started meditating and really practicing yoga. And I think that sense of spiritual connection to something that was greater than myself really helped. I think it helped with my emotions and helped just feel like there was some hope and there was some kind of broader picture than I was able to see right now.
You made a lot of changes, a lot of big changes, it sounds like, in your lifestyle and your diet. And I think a lot of us do that or are asked to do that right off the start. I'm just curious how you found that, because I know, when I first got my diagnosis, I was told, no more sugar, no more gluten, no more alcohol, no more, I wasn't drinking at the time, but the sugar and the gluten were still very much in my life. And I had a raging sugar addiction. And then I was just sent home and just like, make all these changes, live off of kale. And it was really tough for me. And then a lot of like self, blame and shame because I wasn't sticking to this plan all the time that was supposed to help me. So what was the process like for you making all of these changes?
Oh my gosh, I can relate to all of that. It was like, not only are you totally miserable, but we're going to take away anything you enjoy eating, which is like one of the few kind of pleasures left. So I was also on, the gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free. I couldn't drink any caffeine or alcohol. If I would just have a sip, I would be shot for days, even more so. I was on the elimination diet. So there was just basically, I was eating like protein, usually either chicken or fish, and cooked vegetables because I would get really bloated if I would have salad. So yeah, it was kind of miserable. It just sort of felt like this deprivation. And I think too, in looking back, there was a part of me that really resented it because I didn't feel like I was an active participant at that point in my own healing. It really felt like I went to sort of more naturopathic doctors because I thought it was going to be more inclusionary. But in a lot of ways, it was still like, okay, either take this medication, take this supplement, take this herb, do this diet. And I just sort of felt like it was being done to me. And actually, I did have a really perceptive doctor years later I saw for the CFS. And although he didn't really help me with the symptoms, he helped me emotionally because actually he said, you know what, I think I'm going to tell you to take a bunch more supplements and more restrictive diets. And I suspect that's actually perpetuating the trauma in which you felt you weren't in control of your body. And now you're just being told what to do with your body by all these medical professionals. And Raelan, I just started crying. I was like, someone sees me, and I didn't even know that's how I felt. But I think for those of us, even if there isn't a trauma, what I find with other people I meet who have CFS is often, if not always, there's a lot of stress beforehand. And there can be a sense then, whether it was existent before or certainly after the diagnosis of just being so powerless. And so I started realizing with diet and everything else at some point, I have to regain my agency and my power and my collaboration and my healing, because otherwise I was resenting it. And I think those diets didn't work partly because of that, and partly because the root cause of my CFS was not that I wasn't eating enough kale. Right, that wasn't the cause, or that I wasn't taking 30 supplements a day.
Such a good point, and it's one of the things that I just love about doing these interviews is that I learn something about my own journey, and I get more insight of every single person I talk to. I hadn't really thought about that, and when I made the switch later on in my journey to plant-based, it was so easy. I did it effortlessly, but it was my choice, and it was my idea, and I believed in it. So, but in the beginning, when those or imposed on me, it was really, really challenging. And I found, even though I thought I was committed, I was forever trying to find workarounds, like cheats, like, okay, I can't have gluten, I can't have sugar. I really want some chicken fingers, so I'd take some chicken and I'd roll them in cornflakes and then I'd deep fry them, and then I'd make this sauce made out of like stevia and dates, or, like not healthy food at all, but there was no sugar, no gluten, or I'd make all these desserts that were like pure dates and raisins and maple syrup. And I'm like, well, I didn't put any refined sugar in there, so I'm okay.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd buy like diet sodas, like diet orange soda, so I could get that. Like, I just loaded myself up in the beginning with so much crap trying to like find the cheats that it's like a parent had imposed these rules on me. I'm like, okay, how do I...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And especially, I remember watching a video where you were talking about, for me, I just feel better on plant-based diets. And that's what I found too. And so I think especially if you're being asked to eat in a way that just doesn't feel right to your body for whatever reason, not that there is one right or wrong diet, but for you, there's going to be resentment. You're right. And you're going to try to find ways around it that aren't necessarily nutritional.
All right. So what happened from there?
Yeah. So let's see. I think that, this whole 13-year saga had different phases. And I would say the first 5 years, I was really impaired, meaning I couldn't do much out of the house. I mean, I could still take care of myself, which was really nice. But my parents would bring groceries and things. Then I would say like the next maybe 5 or 6 years, I had a little more ability and mobility, and I could do things like I could go to a local yoga studio, and I would notice when I would do things that I would enjoy, especially that was really calming and soothing, I would get a little more energy. So, I mean, I was doing like a lot of restorative yoga, but still I was getting out. I could see friends a little bit more, but like not in the evenings. If I saw a friend in the evening, I'd have insomnia. I wouldn't sleep all night. But what I really noticed over time was kind of back to this point of personal agency and starting to like tune into really what works for me. Was I noticed when I would be in nature, which I really loved, when I would read poetry, or I loved listening to Eckhart Tolle. I actually couldn't read a lot. That was the thing. Because of the brain fog, I could only really read people like Eckhart Tolle because he writes a few words and it means so much. Or I could read poetry because there's just a few words, right? But I started really getting into that. I started writing poetry. I started actually just more doing what gave me a little bit of peace or relief rather than just trying to fix myself and get rid of the symptoms. It wasn't that I totally gave up on it, but I would say, I mean, this took well over a decade to kind of like get off the roller coaster, because I just noticed again and again, I was so exasperated by trying every last diet, every supplement, at one point I was doing like enemas every single night, all these rituals, deep detoxes, 10 days worth. And I was just like, none of these things have worked. And so I just kind of started tuning into my own self and my own body. And then I had this one experience, which actually ended up being a blessing, where I thought, oh, I'll try one more healer. So this woman was supposedly a shamanic healer. She was like a white woman in San Diego, who had done a little bit of training in the Amazon. And so I went in for a session with her, and she was kind of smoking her pipe, and she asked me about the trauma. And I actually started opening up for some reason and really crying. And she changed the subject and said, I don't think we should talk about this let's talk about my cat, which I'm dressing up for Halloween. And so I think somehow she got triggered or something, but I felt so shut down and so numb after that. And I wrote her out a $200 check. I left there numb. And I was just like, I am never going to give away my power to someone else. Like here I'm thinking this woman who's not even listening to me, who's shutting me down, is going to heal me. And it's just not going to happen. And not to say I didn't think I needed help from people or that we don't need support, but it shifted kind of the power dynamic because the situation with her was so ridiculous, that I was paying her $200 to tell me about her cat's costume. Now about 12 years in, something happened. I was actually meditating a lot. I had gotten into transcendental meditation and kind of the inner teachings of yoga, which really teach us that everything on the outside, including our health, comes from our internal state. At least there's some origin with, our minds. And so I was just fascinated with all these philosophies and studies and practices, and it lit me up. And I felt like I got to this point where some kind of surrender happened. And I know that sounds really cliche, but it's hard to describe. I fell into this state of peace. There was actually mental peace, even though I still had the same symptoms. And I kind of was almost observing myself. There would be intense flu-like, aching, but I felt it in my body, but I was kind of watching it. And there was this internal state of non-resistance or peace. And it really wasn't something I tried to do, although I had been studying about it, but it kind of happened. And interestingly, that went on for a year. So it didn't actually shift the physical symptoms, but I sort of was, it's not like I wanted them to be there. This whole situation sucked. It was treacherous. It was grueling. But at that point, somehow I wasn't fighting it. And so I feel like from that place, I really wasn't pursuing medical interventions. I was eating what I wanted, which is like mostly plant-based, organic, whole foods. I just like that. It felt good to my body. It was kind of like intuition, nutrition. I couldn't work. I was on disability, and there was that bothered me. I wanted a purpose. I wanted to contribute, but I just kind of accepted this is where I am right now. And so from that place, interestingly, as I started just like pursuing what I enjoyed, I took this online writing class called Write into Light. And I met this woman and she said, oh, well, I recovered from CFS through this type of mind-body work. If you want, we can set up a phone conversation. And I also got migraines. So I was like, well, I can only talk on the phone for 10 minutes, but yeah, I would love to do that. So we set up this conversation. We start talking and she starts telling me all her symptoms were exactly the same, and she had Epstein-Barr and she had all these things, and that she made this total recovery. Well, I told her I could talk for 10 minutes. 3 hours later, I actually got up and ran around the block. Like I had not ran in 13 years. I had something of like a mini spontaneous remission. Now, this was not the end of the story. Symptoms did come back, so I don't want people to think, oh, if that doesn't happen to me, it can't happen. But what that conversation showed me was that I could recover. And what really changed for me was she explained that all these years, doctors had been saying these viruses were suppressing my immune system. So it was like the Epstein-Barr and 10 other viruses that I just couldn't overcome. And so to me, I felt like that's this insurmountable physical thing. But she explained she had all those diagnoses. She had all those viral titers. And what happened was she learned that it was more how her brain and nervous system were processing stress and just stuck in this hypervigilant mode. And essentially her brain had learned these patterns, these neural pathways, and she recovered. And at the end of this conversation, now you would think this would be infuriating, but by this point I was so with her. She said, Rebecca, you're not sick, and I think she kind of alluded, you're stressed. You've been through trauma. Your system's stuck in this pattern, but you can get out of it. And I believed it. I believed it 100%. Like I felt it in all of me, and my body reacted with that burst of energy, at least in that moment.
Wow. So in that conversation, it wasn't even as if you were doing some sort of, therapy or work on yourself. It was just this breakthrough of understanding of what was happening, and it gave you this break from symptoms, at least for a little bit.
Exactly.
Is that what you're
exactly.
saying?
And that's a really good point, because I think for me, what the key was, even though this woman wasn't a therapist, she wasn't a doctor, and I had been a science journalist, so I love science. So she kind of explained the science of what can happen in our brain and nervous system with chronic fatigue, chronic pain, brain fog, with all these symptoms. And it made sense to me. And so I felt like she was literally re-diagnosing me, which is crazy because she's not a medical professional. But I felt like I can overcome this, because it's now a matter of understanding this knowledge, learning how I can calm down my nervous system, start feeling my emotions, start challenging myself more, like getting back to more activities to sort of retrain my brain. And it was kind of like, to me, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, but for me, I felt like I finally heard the truth. Like, this resonated with me with what was happening. And it gave me hope that I could recover, instead of just being like viruses or faulty genes or mitochondria or things I couldn't do anything about. And after I had that little spontaneous remission, and I ran around the block multiple times, I knew I was on the right path. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt. And that's all it was knowledge. I mean, it was just information, which is really crazy. And I think it was her caring. Like, she cared a lot to help me. She spent 3 hours on the phone with me.
Absolutely incredible. And it makes me question, so many things about my own experience and my own story. And you're talking about food. And for years, I couldn't eat rice. It made me incredibly sick. It was one of my food intolerances. And even after I recovered, I'd still have some rice, feel sick. I was terrified of rice. And I lived in Asia for 8.5 years, so that was a challenging situation. But just recently, I just started trying having little tiny bits. I'm like, oh, I feel okay. Let's try have a little bit more. Oh, I feel okay. And now I can eat copious amounts and I'm fine. Then I just assumed, okay, my body must have healed it. But now I'm thinking, it might have just been a brain association all those years that I had built up, triggering that response. And then as I built that confidence with like, little bit, I'm okay. Little bit, I'm okay. And brought up and socialized not to attribute our physical symptoms to something that's being caused by the brain. Like, we don't even see the connection at all. Like, there's a wall here where this stuff starts and where this stuff starts. And it's amazing to see that that's not the case.
It's so fascinating. Well, exactly. And you know what's so interesting? We're raised, like you say, to see like a physical symptom has to have a physical cause. But now there's actually a whole body of neuroscience and scientific research showing that, and there's just 2 studies out this year, one out of Harvard and one out of Boulder, but that basically shows chronic pain is caused and cured by a form of brain retraining, by this specific approach, because the brain generates pain, and it generates pain as well as fatigue because it senses danger. But that danger can be psychological as well as physical. It's the same part of the brain that perceives it. And so what's so ironic is that the doctor I ended up studying with to train in this, Howard Schubiner, who I highly recommend his book called Unlearn Your Pain. And he talks about fatigue. He talks about these food sensitivities as well. And he really helped me see, it's like, not necessarily that some food is bad for us or some behavior, is that our brain perceives it. So if you eat a poisonous berry, the next time you see that berry, you'll get queasy because your brain via your body is trained to protect you. But you might see another berry, like a blueberry, and you could get queasy because that part of the brain, the emotional limbic centers, aren't like particularly discriminating. They're just sort of picking up information in our environment. And if we're stressed or our nervous system's hypervigilant, they can mistake that like rice isn't good for me, or whatever we're told by our doctors isn't good. But this Dr. Schubiner actually led me to believe, and it became true, that I could eat all these foods. It's just that my brain had become so scared of them. So, of course, this is not true with an actual like food allergy, like peanuts and things. I mean, that really does exist. But with the sensitivities to food, I know it kind of blows your mind. And I'm not trying to say that people should just start eating all these things. I mean, you have to decide for yourself. But what you're describing to me is interesting, that it sounds very similar when you can kind of retrain yourself, that you know it wasn't an innate food allergy. It's an association or a conditioned response. It's like Pavlov's dog, right? It's the same dynamic.
Yeah, and I thank you for taking the time to explain all that, because I think that's an important distinction, because I think a lot of us, myself included, sometimes get a bit, like put back, or like, are you saying we're just imagining this whole thing? And it's not that it doesn't exist. Our brain is a very real part of our body. It's another organ that we have. So it is creating conditions in our body. It is something that is real.
Yes.
It's just not maybe caused by the organ that we think is causing it. It's originating from a different place in the body.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I know like all of us who have dealt with CFS, we've been told like you're making this up, or we've been doubted. So I so get that people are sensitive to this. And these symptoms are 100% real. And the people who I've mentioned, Dr. Sarno and Dr. Schubiner, whose work really helped me, they're very clear. This is 100% real. But like you said, the brain is like the master control. So like we know the brain and the nervous system are constantly scanning for danger. And if they sense it, they'll go into flight, fight, or freeze mode to protect you. So either to help you to run, or fight and you're flooded with stress hormones, or to shut you down if the danger seems too big. I think with CFS, the danger seems too big a lot of times, and we become frozen. And our brain and nervous system is trying to help us. It's creating real physical symptoms. They could not be more real. But in my case, at least, I came to believe that the things I was told were causing the symptoms were more like effects. Like the Epstein-Barr, I'm sure, was higher because my brain and nervous system weren't functioning optimally. And so when you're prepared to run or fight, your digestion's not a priority, your hormones aren't a priority, all these other things are not working as well. That's true. The immune system isn't a priority. But what I found for me is that wasn't the answer, because that was the effect, not the cause. And the cause was like going to the brain. But also, like, not to say this is caused by emotions, because I know that can put people off and they can think, oh, I'm being told I'm just emotional or depressed. It's not that at all. But one thing I really feel is missing in the medical system is acknowledging we are living, breathing, feeling human beings. And back to when Darwin wrote about the evolutionary value of emotions, emotions are actually what tells our brain and nervous system whether we're safe or not safe, whether to trigger the flight, fight, freeze response, right? If there's fear, that response, the nerve firing patterns change, the hormones change to help us. So emotions are the cue. So to act, like, I just felt like doctors didn't ever ask once, was there anything stressful possibly happening in your life before you went from being this active TV news reporter to being homebound? No one asked that. And it's like, where's the heart and the humanity, much less the neuroscience? And I don't mean to blame or implicate. I know everybody's doing their best, but I think we need like more trauma-informed care and even more understanding that the brain and the nervous system do react from fear in perpetuating symptoms.
Yeah, I find it really interesting you talked about the pain, because there's so many people who are living with chronic pain, and I'm fortunate that with my experience, I had some, but it wasn't serious, and I don't know how people function with that level of chronic pain in their life. And then recently I reviewed the Curable app, because people kept telling me about it. And through that process, just learning about the app, how it works, reading the reviews, reaching out to people in the ME/CFS community, asking about their experience with it. And a lot of people are having significant success or completely having their pain gone because of using this. And it is coming from the premise that chronic pain is originating in the brain. So is that at all a part of like the process of your recovery? Is there something similar there?
That's such a great question. I'm really glad to see Curable and other things like that are kind of gaining more acceptance. Curable is based on this exact same approach. So one of the doctors I mentioned, Howard Schubiner, is on the board of Curable. John Sarno has passed away, but he was kind of considered the early pioneer in this. So Curable is based on this. And I actually discovered not the Curable app, but John Sarno's work in this whole mind-body approach much earlier in my CFS journey. But I discovered Sarno's book, Healing Back Pain, which, by the way, back pain, neck pain, all these chronic pains are also usually caused by the brain and nervous system rather than a structural issue. But I couldn't see how to apply that to myself. It was like, but I have exhaustion, I have brain fog, I have all these other things. And I think when I met that woman, I'm ever grateful for, Kathy, and she explained she used a very similar approach as Curable. And she just sort of used fatigue as a synonym. And later I'd reached out to Howard Schubiner and did a training with him. And I asked him, and he said, it's the same thing. Because if you think of fatigue, there's a part of you that doesn't feel safe. And it's sort of like your system's trying to like shut you down and like keep you at home. And it did feel like that for me. Like, I think there was a perception, this is subconscious, by the way, because 90% of our brain and emotions, including our emotions, are subconscious, so we're not aware of them. But I think that for me, there was this perception, like the world's not safe anymore after that assault. And it was sort of like my system trying to keep me at home. Now, it is a bit of a painful way to try to protect you, but we're dealing with also kind of some reptilian parts of the brain, fear-based parts of the brain. But anyway, to go to your point, I haven't done the Curable app because I already recovered through some of the other books and through coaching, but it's really the same approach, and people can apply it to brain fog and digestive issues and fatigue as well.
So can you walk us through, with your recovery using the mind-body approach, what would one day or 1 week in your life look like using this approach?
So do you mean like more when I was recovering? Yes. Or just today? Yeah, more when I was recovering. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, both, because I still integrate it. But I would say when I was still over that first year, I was every day doing these meditations called somatic tracking. So I'm really glad Curable, I'm told by some of my clients now, has somatic tracking meditations on there. But basically, you don't even need a meditation, but it's helpful to be guided, where you're just kind of tracking sensations in your body. So it's like the fatigue might end up feeling like, heaviness through your whole body, or say, I would have a lot of burning in my arms. So I would bring my mind into that, but you're getting these messages of safety, like I'm safe and okay. There's actually nothing wrong with my body. So you're kind of retraining your brain. And I would do that every day. I would actually do it every night as well. And I feel like it broke the insomnia habit. And I say habit because that's also kind of a subconscious learned behavior that the bed becomes associated with anxiety. So I would do the somatic tracking, usually a few different meditations every day. I just loved reading the books. There's different podcasts on this approach. Curable has one. There's others that I really like called Tell Me About Your Pain is one of them. So I was learning about it. And then I would go and start to do things. I was like, oh, I'm going to go try to walk a half a mile or a mile or something. At this point, I would just walk a little more and I would notice the symptoms. So as I'm doing it, the symptoms are rising. I'm getting that malaise. And I would just be reiterating, no, I'm okay. I got this. I know what's going on. And that's how you retrain your brain, that you can do these things, which I think a lot of people do anyway through graded exposure. Honestly, it doesn't take a lot of time, this approach. It's kind of just learning it, doing the meditations. I would see this coach once a week in the beginning, then every other week, and just started really adding on activities to my life, including foods. I started eating more things that I wanted. And at first, you do have a reaction because your brain thinks that's not good for you. But then within usually a few times, I could just eat it okay. It's crazy. I know it does sort of seem wild. And I think that there has to be a certain pacing and timing with this. Because I'll say I was really ready. I wouldn't have been able to just jump into this years before when, for one, I didn't really believe it. And I was bedbound. So, just to have compassion for people, I think that was another thing I really brought in, Raelan. And again, it's not that it took time, but I started bringing in self-compassion. When I would get symptoms, I would just ask, how am I feeling emotionally? Because with this work, you want to bring it back to the emotions, because we so focus on the physical symptoms, but you really want to tend to the emotions, which are driving the state of the nervous system. So it's how am I feeling emotionally? And I would acknowledge, well, I'm scared. I'm really scared. I'm really frustrated. And then I would just kind of be compassionate with myself. And I still am to this day, that's really hard. Just talk to myself. I'm so sorry. What do you want or need right now? And instead of just pushing myself, I would challenge myself. But if I needed to back down, I would. and sometimes take a break and just kind of tune into like, what do you want or need? It just has gotten to be, and now it's been a few years, a much more kind of personal, attentive way of dealing with yourself. I mean, it sounds funny to be talking to yourself, but I think we all do anyway. So it's just doing it in a much more compassionate way, where I used to beat myself up, like you had said, for not recovering. I was like, I'm failing. What's wrong with me? And I mean, that Dr. Schubiner and others will explain that self-criticism actually does activate the danger alarm signal in the brain and the nervous system. So it actually can feed into symptoms. And so, yeah, just being a lot more like compassionate with myself. Like, this is really hard, but we can do hard things and we'll pick it back up when it's time.
Yeah, and I know, Rebecca, you and I have talked about before that we've noticed a pattern of personality traits with some people, at least, who face these kind of illnesses, people who drive themselves hard, people who are critical of themselves. So do you think that plays a role in symptom perpetuation or impacts recovery in some way?
When people read John Sarno's books, and there's one called The Mind-Body Prescription, and he describes the personality type of people who get chronic symptoms. And he does talk about CFS, but he also talks about chronic pain and other symptoms that he believed had an origin in the brain and nervous system. And he describes like perfectionists, check, right? People pleasers, check. Maybe you're doing things for other people instead of for yourself. People who are like really conscientious, hard driving, put a lot of pressure on themselves to do things well. And I just felt like, I was seeing myself in those pages. And as I meet people with CFS, and you meet so many people, I do see that pattern a lot. And not just that, with myself and with a lot of people I meet, it's like, not only are we putting all this pressure and stress and even sometimes criticism on ourselves, but we're holding the emotions in. So it becomes kind of like a pressure cooker, right? Like if you have a water that's boiling with the lid on, eventually it's going to burst because we're holding in all the pressures. I remember, I know I keep bringing him up, but he's such a kind man, and I think he's really very forward looking. But Dr. Schubiner in a training was saying, people who get CFS and these chronic symptoms, they're really nice people. Like, I get to work with the nicest people, right? Because it's not people who take out their stuff on other people. But the flip side of that is like kind of holding in the emotions. Part of that too, I'll throw in, I did some journaling, like expressive writing, to kind of like really just get out all the frustration. I didn't mention that earlier in my practices, but just to kind of like let myself really journal and write about anything that I'm too nice to say to anyone else. that was helpful. And then, back to your point, the personality traits, I think just learning that, we all kind of learn this with ME/CFS, like we can't be perfectionists, right? Like some of us, I mean, I was lucky if I could just take a shower some days. So it kind of softened, and that was a good thing. But then when I recovered and went back to work, I did see some of those tendencies come back, and I do actively work with it, where I'll notice if I'm pushing too hard, like if I'm feeling stressed or pressure, or like I've gotta get these things done, I can start getting a little fatigue. And I can also start getting, I recovered from interstitial cystitis through the same work, the bladder pain. I can get like little hints of it, but I'm always able to link it to like emotional stress, either that happened to me or that I'm putting myself under. And once I'm aware of it, usually the symptoms subside, or sometimes I'll do like the somatic tracking meditation I mentioned to you or something like that. But I think I've softened, I still have some of that. I don't think we have to like totally change who we are to get well again. But I found it was a wake-up call to be more kind to myself and more authentic in who I always was, where I think in many ways before, I liked my life as a TV news reporter, but in a lot of ways it wasn't really me. I mean, I do tend to like a quieter, more introspective life. I like to do more writing, and I think a lot of times it's like more finding who you really are, and who you really are in treating yourself like you would treat a good friend. I think these things can actually help more than we know, and they have helped me a lot. And I see it with a lot of people that it can really help them. to make those connections. Like, this isn't just unkind to myself, like, it's actually affecting my health.
Yeah, that's another light bulb moment for me when you were talking, like, oh my goodness, the anger and how we are kind of really nice people, aren't we? Like, I really like our community.
Yeah, right. We're so nice, which makes it, a joy. But you know who else has helped me more recently is Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion. Because a lot of times when we are like hard driving, we just take it out on ourselves. But to realize like, this is really, really hard. Like to have compassion on ourselves is also really helpful and kind of can soften the blow of all these losses that we go through.
I think that compassion piece is massive, and also that release. Like, I remember I was interviewing Daniel von Loosbrook on this channel, and he's just incredible, and I learned so much from him as well. But he talked about how important it is to journal your anger, and I thought, I'm not angry, I don't have to journal. But I thought, I'll try it. So I added it to my morning journaling practice. I'm like, what am I angry about? I was angry about a lot. I had so much anger. Like, I was like, it was crazy. So it is a little bit of that bottling, and I was born and raised in Canada, and we're very strongly socialized to be polite and keep the peace and not make waves. And so it's just so much happening with the emotions and our personalities and how we treat ourselves, how we interact with other people. It's just really, really important things to know. And for people who haven't seen, his interview is incredible. I'll link it up here on the screen somewhere if you want to check it out. I highly advise giving it a watch, because he's just another fountain of information. But so I'm curious. So when you had this realization of what your recovery path was going to be, and you started doing all this work, how long did it take you from when you first started till when you got to a place where you felt pretty much functionally recovered?
I would say that I had that first boost, which was amazing for a few days to actually and I had been going through a really symptomatic period where I was kind of back in bed a lot of the time. It was in the early winter of 2018. And to go from that to running around the block and actually feeling pretty good was stark. But then I would say it took about probably 8 or 9 months till I felt like I'm really recovered. And even probably a year before I was adding a lot more things, like back to some international travel. So in the mind-body way of thinking and this learned associations we were talking about, because I had these traumas happen overseas. So I had the assault, I had that airplane trip I told you about. So when I would try to go near an airplane, I mean, my brain, I would get so many symptoms, but I started connecting. This is just like a perceived danger, even though I'm going to a different place. So it took maybe a year to kind of get back to some more travel and being really active. Of course, that was before the pandemic, so I'm not doing a lot of traveling. But and honestly, I still incorporate this in my daily life. I still love kind of doing a somatic meditation throughout the day. If I notice myself getting stressed or pressuring myself, or maybe just not feeling quite tip top, I just sort of check in what's going on emotionally, notice what my thoughts are. It just becomes a way of life, right? But I think, it's been, 3 years now. I feel really grateful. I'm at this point where I know there's so many years where I would never want to go through it again, honestly, and I wouldn't want anyone to have to. It's so hard. But I am at this point where it's like, I'm grateful for the ways I've grown that I don't know if I would have otherwise. I might still be pushing myself and beating myself up and trying to really find my own sense of self-esteem through my career, which I largely realized I was doing to try to feel better about myself. But now it comes more from inside. There's just more acceptance and things. So I think these all can be gifts, like whatever your path is. We all kind of learn these lessons. And I know it's, at some points that's really annoying to hear, but, right. And I get that, but I do feel, I live a lot more balanced, peaceful life than I used to, for sure.
It is a massive gift of this experience, or it can be. Every single person I talk to, every single person I've interviewed who has recovered, he says something similar. They're just in such a better place than they were before, and they've learned so much. And it's such a weird thing. Like, I used to, with my own journey, I'm like, am I grateful? I think I just threw up a little bit in my mouth, even just thinking about being grateful for that hell. I'm like, would I take it away if I had the choice? And it's just such a crazy thing to think, I don't think I would. And it's just mind-blowing. Wow. And I'm sure if someone had said that to me when I was really in the thick of it, I would have wanted to punch them in the face. But I wouldn't, because I'm Canadian. I would have just bottled it down.
Yeah. You'd hold it in. Exactly. But, to me, that's like a really form of kind of deep acceptance and healing to get to that point where it's like, wow, I wouldn't take it away. I'm grateful for what I've learned. And just to kind of share that a lot of lessons come. I mean, I see it as sort of like, for me, and I see this with a lot of people, to some degree, some of the things that led or fed into the symptoms, not to say it was our fault. There's a lot of things we don't understand about this disease, but some of the things that fed into it, we have the chance to kind of rebalance in ourselves. And then they make the quality of life a lot better, like turning self-criticism into self-compassion, learning to take more personal empowerment, in my case, instead of just thinking that doctors or someone else was going to fix me or heal me. And granted, it wasn't their fault because I was also kind of giving them that power. But to realize like, wow, there's so much resilience inside. And for me, I've learned nothing's going to work unless I intuitively feel right about it. Like if I'm doing something as a means to an end, whether it's about my health or anything else, it never goes well. It just never does. So like retapping into that intuition has been a big one too.
What did it feel like for you after so many years being unwell to, relatively quickly recover after, it had been 12 or more years? What did that feel like?
Oh, I remember just feeling every day waking up like a kid, like, oh my gosh, I have energy. I can go take a walk. At that point, I wasn't necessarily back to running, but I can go explore the world. Anything I could do just felt like it was brand new. Like I was learning it for the first time. I remember I went to a Zumba class. Now this would have been some months in to the recovery. But the teacher, I'm not like the most, coordinated dancer, but I do love to dance. And I felt like everybody else there was like following in steps. I had never taken Zumba. That was this craze that happened when I had CFS. So I was like completely like the class was going one way, I was going the other way, but I was so happy. I was overjoyed. And there must have been like 80 people in the class. At the end of it, the teacher came up and she's like, I have never seen someone so happy in this dance class. And these were like regular Zumba people. So it was like, I was so happy that I could dance. So it is amazing. I would kind of question it sometime and I would be like, but I would have symptoms that would come up. I'd have flare-ups a lot. So I was kind of reminded like, okay, when I would kind of question like, is this real? It was like, it is real, but it took a while to stabilize. I think now things for me, like maybe there's a little less awe of being able to do things, but there's definitely more appreciation, kind of more of like a stable appreciation every day for just simple things that aren't that simple when you have ME, right? Taking a walk, meeting a friend, being able to work is a big one, or just do what you really want to do.
I notice it a lot when I just have a really busy day and I go through this crazy day or maybe even a really busy week. And I might get a bit tired. I'm still human. You can only push yourself so far. But I'm just like, wow, like look what I can do. This is incredible. And I still have these moments, even though like you, it's not, the little things, you start to just get used to it. But I still just have these moments like, I really did this. Like this is really in my rearview mirror. Because it took me a while to fully trust it. It was like a tentative, like, yay, I'm here. Like, don't spook it, It might hear me gloating and it might come back. But yeah, it's an amazing place to finally be. And I only recently just got to this place where I feel comfortable and like, okay, I think it's fully behind me. And it's a really amazing thing. Because I know for so many of us, for all those years, it can feel like you're never going to get there. And it's just like amazing thing. Like, wow, I did it. We did it. It's possible.
Yeah. Recovering from CFS is the hardest thing I've ever done by far. It really is amazing. Sometimes you kind of question it, but I think that's a good thing because it makes you appreciate it, right? And I saw your video recently talking about, I know this is behind me, and it actually gave me more confidence. I was like, wow, she's got like such certainty. That's amazing. Because I think I do sometimes still question it a little bit. But it's all kind of in stages, right?
Yeah.
it's all stages, and then you get to the point where you feel it's behind you and you've recovered, but yet you have all these things you've learned and that you still integrate.
Yeah, it's a good place to be, and that's why I just did that video, and I didn't do it until now, because it was the first time I'm realizing, I'm like, okay, I think I'm actually finally at peace and trusting that this is behind me. It's interesting, Rebecca, that like you, like so many of us, this whole experience shaped your focus or your career or, your passions. So, what are you still a news reporter, or where did this take you with your professional world?
Right. No, I'm not. For so many years, all I wanted to do was get well and go back to being a news reporter, because I really did enjoy that. I knew I wanted that profession from the time I was in 6th grade. I wrote my career report. I wanted to be a journalist, but I changed so much along the way. When I did finally recover, there was just nothing in me that really wanted to go back to that. I thought about it. But also the nature of news had changed, and it's so 24/7 now, and it's a little bit insane. And also, I think what I was so incredibly struck by, how many practitioners. I went to 50 doctors and healers over the course of 13 years. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the thing that helped me was this woman speaking to me, like really caring about me, listening to my story, asking what had happened, what stressors happened, kind of explaining the science, and I recovered through that. And so I just was led to train in that field. Even though I had recovered myself, I did a number of trainings in mind-body training, nervous system, life coaching, and things over a couple of years. And then I really call myself a mind-body coach. So I work with people really with all kinds of diagnoses that are generated by the brain and nervous system. A lot of people with ME/CFS come to me, but it's also people with chronic fatigue, chronic headaches, back pain, things like that. And I should say, not everything is generated by the mind and body. I mean, there are tumors, there are fractures, there are infections, there are things that actually have a pathological cause that can be treated and should be treated, right? It's just when there's things that don't seem to have a clear cause or a clear cure that we kind of look more to this connection. So I work with people one-on-one, and I teach group classes because it is a different paradigm. So I feel like people can learn about this approach in a really inexpensive way. They can get some of the books or listen to the podcast, but it is sort of important to see if it resonates or not, because part of what the healing is, as you heard with my light bulb moment, is actually really getting it, that like the cause of these symptoms, and that alone can turn down the fear of the danger signal in the brain, which calms the nervous system, which calms the symptoms. So because of that, I started teaching classes, because I saw it was really important for people to kind of have knowledge and different meditations. And it's been really fun to be kind of in community with people. So that's what I do now full time. And I write about this quite a bit. And use my journalism more, writing about mind-body healing. I blog and that kind of thing. And it really does feel like my calling. It feels like something I would just do for free because I want to do it. But I got to this point where it's like, okay, I either need to get another job because I'm off disability, or really make this my vocation. And I just decided I wanted to do this full time. So it's been interesting growing my own business, but it's from my heart, and I really love it. It's amazing to see people not just recover, but like learn and heal and grow as people.
Well, I think that's just incredible, Rebecca. I mean, I don't have to tell you or anybody watching that there is such a need for this kind of support out there. I think that's why so many of us, it's another silver lining, or another gift of this whole thing. We come through it and then become passionate about wanting to connect with the other people who are facing similar things, because we see this massive gap, this massive hole in the medical system with millions of people in it that are just lost and alone and trying to figure this out and not getting any kind of many of them any kind of helpful support. So I think I saw it on your website, like we heal ourselves and then we pass it on. Like it's just we're pulling each other out of this together, which I think is a really incredible thing. So I'm just so grateful for you and the work that you do, and that you're out there providing this kind of support, because it's, as we all know, it's just so needed.
Oh, thank you, Raelan. I'm so grateful to you. Honestly, I'm so touched by looking at how much you give out, how much you put out to do this just to support the community. It's clear that your heart is so in it and you just really want to help people. And I know that you're a lifeline for a lot of people. So thank you.
It's a really heartbreaking thing to see how many people are still suffering, especially when you know that suffering so intimately. So yeah, I used to think, when I first started doing this channel, people would say, reach out to me and send me these beautiful messages. And like, because of you, because of your channel and the people on your channel, I have hope. And I'm like, great. Like, this is worth it just for that. I'll do it just for that. And then the more time that passes, people are reaching out to me and saying, because of the people on your channel, I found a way to recover and I'm fully recovered again. And it's just, this is just, it's the most selfish thing I've ever done, because I get so much out of it. It's really rewarding for me personally. So it's a good motivator to keep at it. It's a really incredible thing to be able to connect with people in this way. And even if you can help the tiniest little bit, it's really amazing. So if people want to learn more about the work that you do or follow you in social spaces, how can they do that?
The best way is probably through my website, which is just RebeccaTolin.com, because I have some free somatic meditations on there if you want to try it out. I have a blog. I have loads of just free. There's a resource page and a media page, and a lot of it is sort of geared to how you can use the approach you would find in the Curable app, but for fatigue. Because a lot of people that try that approach are they're not talking about chronic fatigue, much less ME/CFS, which we know is not just fatigue. So that's really the best way. I'm also on Facebook, but I'm just not a huge social media person, so probably the website.
And of course,
best.
all of this will be available in the video description. So for people watching, just expand that and you'll find all of that there. I highly encourage you to check it out. And Rebecca, you've mentioned a lot of really great resources and books and so forth, so we'll make sure to have a full list of all of those things linked below as well. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these doctors or these books that Rebecca has referenced, that will be there as well. And if you enjoyed this video, I've got a whole playlist of full recovery stories just like this one. I'll link it up here. It's just really moving, really inspiring stuff, and I learned something from every single one. So I think, I'm just so grateful to people like yourself. I'm grateful to you, Rebecca, for doing this. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Oh, it's so my pleasure. Likewise, Raelan. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you who are watching. I cannot believe the love and the support you guys throw my way with everything that you're going through. It's so moving. So I'm just trying to throw that all right back at you and give you some stuff that hopefully is helpful. So looking forward to your thoughts and your comments in the video description. Let's keep the conversation going. Rebecca and I will answer your questions there as well. So thank you again, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone who is watching. Whatever you are facing, keep going. Hang in there. You have totally got this. Things can and will change. And good for you for watching videos like this and all the way to the end. Throw a thumbs up in the emoji in the comments if you made it to the end, because you're a superstar. Good for you. So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.